what you have to do is like Joaquin was saying, the key to passing the exam is not necessarily knowing different bits of information, facts, but it's knowing what type of information is in what manuals. Okay. And going to the right manual, and then kind of understanding a little bit about the manual and how it's organized, whether it's got a good index that you're going to use, whether you really need to use the table of contents or so forth. So that's what I'd like to do at the beginning of the first class of the month, is to do an overview of these manuals. Sometimes just an overview of these manuals can get you a long way towards passing the exam. Okay. And what I do is I like to go down the list that the state gives us. All right. And then just talk about each one individually. The first one on the list is the air conditioning and troubleshooting handbook. Okay. So let's take a look and see, what we have going on with the air conditioning troubleshooting handbook. First of all, it is just what it says. It is a troubleshooting book. And the guidelines that I tell you will work much of the time, but maybe not all of the time, when I give you kind of these hints about these books. The hint about this book, one of the hints about this book is that it is what it says. It is a troubleshooting book. And so a question that you're going to answer out of this book many times is going to present itself as a problem, as an issue. Something's not working right. The head pressure is too high, the suction pressure is too low. Somewhere along those lines. Compressor fails to start. Things like that. And you're going to know, okay, well, there's trouble in the system, there's trouble in paradise, and there's a good chance that a question like that is going to come out of the troubleshooting guide. Okay. Now let's take a look at the troubleshooting guide. How should we use the troubleshooting guide? Well, does it have a good index is the first thing that we need to know. And I can tell you, it does have a good index. You can, even a layperson, even somebody who's not really familiar with this book, can see, okay, yeah, great, it's got an index. It looks like it is pretty detailed, and it is. And one of the things I want to tell you about indexes is when you're going through practice exams and we're finding questions and we're talking about stuff, and you see something in the index, you might be able to see. I've highlighted some things in the index itself. Sometimes it helps just to highlight in that index. So you might want to do that. And it's got a pretty good index. It doesn't work all the time, but it does have a pretty good index. Now, the second second thing you're going to do, if you can't find the answer in the index in most of these books, what we'll do is we will look at the table of contents. All right. So we are looking at the table of contents. And what you'll notice is it's not a typical table of contents. It is much more detailed than your typical table of contents. If you look at the page numbers, just about every other page or every third page or every fourth page, they have something in the table of contents where they've listed. Well, why is that? Well, because of the nature of the book being a troubleshooting book, you have an issue and then you have a solution, and it doesn't take a whole long time to go through that. All right. So just 1 page or 2 pages or 3 pages will be all that is needed to explain that situation and flesh it out. So that's one reason that, that it's like that. And then it's one thing that you can, when you're, think about when you are, when you're looking for something. So let's say you didn't find it in the index. Well, let's go to the table of contents and we can kind of scan the table of contents to see if we can find that issue. Yeah. Okay. And that's pretty much what the book is about. Now, there's a couple of things that I do want to point out that are interesting and are helpful to you. And the one is on page 427. All right. So if you look on page 427, there is a section about safety procedures. And the reason I point this out is because when you get a safety question, you should automatically think OSHA. Okay. Joaquin talked about that a minute ago. There were some OSHA questions as well, ladder safety and so forth. However, the people that make these exams know that, okay, and they want to challenge you, okay. If you do not pass the exam, then they make more money. All right, they justify their existence, okay. If everybody passed the exam the first time, it wouldn't make any sense to have an exams, right? So they want, basically it's their job to make sure some people fail. So what they do is they get a little tricky and they say, okay, we're going to have some safety questions that don't come out of the OSHA manual. All right. And this is one of the places they go. All right. They go to page 427. And sometimes they just ask, what does danger mean? What does warning mean? What does caution? What is a safety instruction? And you might think that that would be a silly thing for them to ask, but we've seen it. Okay. And there actually is a slight difference between the meaning of a warning and the meaning of caution. All right. And you would have to, make that distinction and answer accordingly on the exam. Okay. As we go through a couple of pages, as we flip through, we go to page 428, and we have been lucky enough to have people give us some feedback about the types of things they've seen on exams, and rigging is one of them. That's the bottom of page 428. Okay, use of cranes. It says never use cranes under power lines. All right, that's probably a real good plan, but it tells us they're in black and white, and you're going to be able to answer that on the exam.
Well, I learned that I learned that the other day.
There you go. All right, that some of these things actually do translate into real world circumstances.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
almost burn a building down.
Oh my God. We're going to be on page 430, and we're talking about leak testing and pressure testing systems. Okay. One of the things it says on page 430 under that section, do not use oxygen for pressurizing refrigeration systems. Oxygen and oil can combine and cause explosion. Well, we all know that. We're probably going to get that right on the exam, but it's always good to be able to find it. And if you do think you know the answer, you can answer it and go on. But you might want to make that little check mark. You might want to check it. It's always good to, even if you know an answer, to take time, if you have the time, and actually find it in the book. Because sometimes you may be surprised. There might be a little caveat there that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So be aware. Read the questions fully. Read all the answers fully, and make sure that they're not trying to trick you there. Under refrigerants, there's some safety information about do not enter enclosed area after a refrigerant leak. Okay, use the buddy system. It says, of course, we're going to wash our skin with soap and water and so forth. And they talk a little bit about phosgene at the top of 431. All right. Fumes. And it's a deadly gas. So there's a little bit more. We're going to jump over to page 435, where there is a discussion of taking high voltage measurements, which they describe as 600 volts or more. You don't want to be doing those with a handheld instrument. Okay. All right. So that's a little bit about the safety, the safety section of this book, which is a little bit different than the rest of the book, because that's definitely doesn't fall under the category of troubleshooting. On page 438, there is something that does fall under the heading of troubleshooting, and there's a chart. There's a chart, starts on page 439, and it goes all the way through the 480s, okay, all the way basically to the back of the book, or close to the back, or to the end of chapter 7 anyway. All right, so this is a troubleshooting chart, and as you can look on page 439, there are four columns there. You have your condition, okay, and this is what they're going to tell you on the exam. They're going to say, okay, here's our condition. What are the causes? Okay, or possibly here's, what does cause, here's the cause. What would the condition be, or what's the corrective action, or the reference. You can actually look in the book. They won't ask you about that on the exam, but a lot of times there will almost definitely be questions that you're going to get out of the troubleshooting guide. Now, sometimes what they'll do is maybe they give you a condition, all right, and you look at the possible cause, and there is more than one of these possible causes as choices in the exam question. That's a common thing. All right. Now, here's our suggestion if that happens. If that happens, you're going to answer the one closest to the top. Okay. Because the way we understand it is these are in order of most probable. All right. So you're going to answer the one closest to the top. I want you to also understand, if you look on page 438, that this chart is broken up into types of appliances. All right. So there is on page 438, they have them listed there: electric heat, gas heat, heat pump cooling, heat pump heating, and so forth, refrigeration, air conditioning, ice machine, either a cube or a flaker, and heating oil. So many times in the question, they will tell you the type of appliance that they're talking about. And of course, that's going to help you. And if you look at the very top of the table, it'll tell you what section you're in. For instance, the one on page 439 is electric heat, and that goes all the way through 442, which is gas heat, and so on and so forth throughout the whole book. All right, so keep that in mind. That's our troubleshooting book, and just a little bit of little bit of information about how to find information there. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is the Code of Federal Regulations. All right. Here it is, Code of Federal Regulations. Yours is going to look different than mine. Yours is probably 10 if you got it from one exam prep, and it's okay. This is a book that a lot of people have different versions of this book, okay? And that's fine because the information really hasn't changed from year to year. It's pretty much all the same. And as you might guess, okay, it's going to be a safety question. They're going to ask you, as Joaquin said, about ladders or about trenching or about motor vehicles or about first aid kits, or they could even ask you about toilet facilities. All these things are safety related, okay? Health and safety related. So it's a pretty much no-brainer that you're going to go to the OSHA manual, and it's going to present itself as a safety issue, okay, most of the time. Now, we just saw an exception to that, though. We could be going to the troubleshooting book for those particular issues that we talked about. If you can't find it here, you might want to try that. So the first thing we want to do is we explore the OSHA book. We want to look at the index. Does it have a good index? And the answer to that question is yes. Okay, so you're going to get the question. It is going to present itself. Obviously, it's a safety question. Unless it's one of those issues we talked about that's in the troubleshooting guide, you're going to go to the index and it's going to take you to the right page. Now, most of these manuals, most of these OSHA manuals not only will tell you what page number it's on, but they'll also give you a paragraph number, all right, in the index. So I encourage you to take advantage of that, because if you were to flip to any page in this manual, you'll see that there are hundreds possibly of regulations on each page. All right. So you might get to the right page and that'd be great, but holy moly, we've got a lot to dig through here. So if they gave you a section number, a paragraph number, okay, then that's going to help. Also, with regard to these paragraph numbers, when we talk about this book, what I will be doing is I will be talking in terms of the paragraph number and the chapter letter and so forth. So most everything is what they call 1926. It says right here, CFR 1926. That's just a law number. CFR, Code of Federal Regulations 1926. So when I express to you where to go in the book, I'll be saying 1926 point, and then there will be a number, 651, whatever. So that's the way I'll be talking about that. And if you can do the same for me, so we can find this information while we're going through it, that would be great. So we're trying to navigate this book. And that's going to be the key, obviously. That's the key to every book is, first of all, getting to the right book and then navigating the book itself. So we're in the index. We found the index was good, which is great. But, there's going to be those instances possibly where the index doesn't get us there. If the index does not get us there, what I want you to realize is how it's organized. So go to the table of contents in the front of the book. And if you flip over a couple of pages into the table of contents, you'll see where they have a subpart A, subpart B, subpart C, D, E, and so forth. Well, why do they call it a subpart? Well, because it's a legal term. All right. It's a law, Code of Federal Regulations, 1926. And as they break it down into its different categories, they call them subparts. Sometimes I'll even use the word chapter because that's just an easier for us to understand what a chapter is than a subpart, but that's just a government term basically for chapter. Okay. Well, so each chapter, each subpart is about a particular aspect of the job site. Okay. For instance, if you see subpart D, environmental health and environmental control, occupational health and environmental controls, that's where they're going to be talking about your hearing protection. That's where they're going to be talking about your sanitation, exposure to lead, and so on and so forth. And then you might go to subpart G, which is signs, signals, and barricades. Okay, signs have different rules about signs. Different color signs mean different things, and so forth. And so you might get a question about that. Subpart I is tools. Okay, a lot of times we get questions about tools, hand and power tools, of the switches and what type of switches. Some power tools are supposed to have particular switches. Some of them are what they call momentary, which are going to shut off immediately when you let your finger off. So you've got different things about power tools. Pneumatic tools is going to be there. There's different safety equipment for power tools, for pneumatic tools. Scaffolding seems to be an important thing for for safety. Okay. In the real world, people fall. Okay. That's one of the main reasons people get hurt on the jobs is they fall. They fall off of scaffolding. They fall off of ladders. They fall because there was not a fall protection on a job site where somebody stepped off what they call a leading edge. And so on the exam, they tend to be heavy on fall protection as well. Okay, so expect some questions about something that have to do with fall protection. For instance, if you'll flip over to subpart X is stairways and ladders. I'd be very surprised if you did not get a question about stairways and ladders. Back up a little bit, subpart P is about excavations. Okay, now Joaquin told us there wasn't anything about excavations, but not everybody gets the same exam, obviously. So there you go. So understand how it is organized, all right? So that if you get a question out of the index, if you get a question and you can't find it in the index, then you can find it made possibly in the table of contents and work it that way. Okay. We are going to talk about the contractor's manual. Now, it does not matter for this exam whether or not you have the 2017 or the 2021. Both will work. And I believe it's the exact same page number as well. All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to find chapter 7. Okay. And I believe the first page of what is ropes and rigging is actually it's excavations. Starts on page 7-41. Okay. This is one of the things about this manual. One of the things I started, I got my first manual, I think in 2005. And going through this manual, when I took my first exam, they didn't have a table. They didn't have an index, which made it any more challenging. You guys have an index. But I think the questions have gotten more sophisticated. But regardless, when you go through, most of us have been through this manual because most of you, I believe, have taken the business exam. And because that's usually the way we suggest you do it, is you do the business exam first. But as you go through this book, everything pretty much makes sense. Everything's about business. Okay. You've got your workers' comp, and you've got your licensing issues, and you've got your, safety paperwork that you have to do, all the forms that you have to fill out, and then your lien law and that kind of thing. But when you get to chapter 7 and you get through about halfway into chapter 7, all of a sudden on page 7-41, they start talking about rigging and ropes and slings and pulleys and blocks and things like that. To me, it's stuff that does not belong in this book. You know what? But they've never called me and asked me what I think about it. So they just keep doing what they're doing, and they have all this stuff in it. And this is going to be, what you're going to have. You're going to have to be responsible for it. Now, the calculations that he talked about were, safe working load, and you're going to want to be able to find safe working load. You're going to want to be able to find all the different types of ropes, and what, the things that can compromise a rope, and so forth, and just some general information. And then you've got some pulley blocks and what happens when you run a line through a pulley block on 782, how it affects, the actual load on the pulley block. Just lots of different things. And as you go through the practice exams, as we do it together, or if we go through this chapter together, that'll all become clear is what they're talking about. But there'll be a few calculations, those safe working load calculations. And if you're thinking about, get a question about rope or rigging, those are the two words that I want you to be aware of. And the one reason I want you to be aware of them, I'm in the 2017 now, but you may have a 2021. And remember, the 2021 has a separate index that you can bring. Now you need to make sure you have it bound somehow, but if the index is not in the book itself for some reason, they didn't add it when they printed, but supposedly, and it does tell you that you can bring it in, and make sure you bring it in. And don't be surprised if as contractors, our job is to anticipate problems, right? Well, I anticipate somebody's going to have a problem. It hasn't been much of an issue yet, but when you've got that extra index that you're bringing in, I have a feeling at some point somebody's going to have an issue at a testing center with bringing that in. But anyway, what I want to do is I want to direct you to your index, whether it be that separate printed index or the index that's in the back of the 2017. And I want you to be aware of these two categories, rigging and rope. All right. The reason I want you to do that is because when you get a question, if you go to this index, we know it's going to be in chapter 7, but at least this way, it should get you real close to the correct page too. Occasionally, it'll lead you astray, but for the most part, it'll get you to the right page. So that's ropes and rigging, all right, out of chapter 7. So be aware of that. Okay, pipe fitter's handbook. That little pipe fitter's handbook. Mine's eluding me right now. Okay, but it's the little black pipe fitter's handbook, and it's actually kind of a cool little book. And it's unfortunate that it works so well. It is so easy to find information in the pipe fitter's handbook that they don't give you many questions out of it, unfortunately. It's almost something that's kind of fun to use. Okay, it's all about pipes and all the different aspects, what you can put in different pipes, how they expand when you put heated materials into pipes, how many supports you're supposed to have, what the interval of your supports are for different pipes and different uses, the colors based on what the pipe is used for, what type of material is in a pipe, the different colors, the different joinery methods for polyethylene and PVC and what have you. And then we also talk about valves. Okay, so you get a question about a valve. what's the best valve to use for steam service, and so forth, and all these different charts about maybe the lane length of a valve, based on its size and the type of valve it is, and so forth. The other thing one thing we always talk about, the index in a book, and it does have a great index. It'll get you there. And it also has, in the back of it, it has a conversion table. So I want you to be aware of that. So if you need to know how many foot-pounds were in a horsepower, or how many gallons were in a cubic foot, or something along those lines, I believe it's on page 5-56 on your pipe fitter's handbook. So be aware of that. You want to make sure that you can find that. And it's such a cool little book. I just really like the little book. But you almost want to, you wish you'd get more questions out of it, because it's just so easy to find stuff and figure that out. Okay. So we're going to move on to our NFPA books. Joaquin told us that there were lots of questions out of the NFPA books. All right. Probably because these are some pretty hard books to navigate. All right. They are pretty hard to navigate. Now, I'll elaborate on that. So we have the 96, the 90A, and the 90B. The first thing I want to do is I want to talk about the 96. 90A and the 90B, they're very similar. So let's first of all make some differentiations. Okay, so the 96 is about commercial cooking. All right, so the question could actually say commercial cooking in it. It could be about hoods. It could be about commercial ductwork. It could be about appliances and clearances between appliances, and how close you can be to combustible or not, non-combustible material, or something like that. But something in the question is going to lead you to believe it's about commercial cooking. Now, the interesting part about it is, or the more complicated part about it, or the tricky part about it, however you want to say, is this type of information is also in the mechanical code book. All right. So it could be in this book. It could be in the mechanical code book. And in many times we'll find it's in both. And the good news is they agree with each other for all, I've actually never seen an instance where the code book and the NFPA book actually contradict each other. They're all the same, it's the same information, which is good, because that's, for other contractors' exams, it's not necessarily that case. So you're kind of lucky there. And the other thing about these NFPA books is many times the question will present itself in such a way that you understand that it's an issue about fire. Okay, it's about heat, it's about not causing a fire, fire safety, National Fire Protection Association, and it's red. Okay, now we take a look at the index in this book, because that's where we're going to go first for anything. And the 96 isn't so bad. It's okay. It's not the greatest index. These 96, these three books, this 90A, the 90B, and the 96, have indexes that, indices is the actual correct word, but I'd just say indexes. The indexes are poorly organized. Okay, they're poorly organized indexes. So something that you're going to look up is maybe not going to be where you think it's going to be. All right. So for instance, I'll just give you, for instance, I'm in the index of the 96, and we're going to look up replacement air. So we look up R, we get a question about replacement air, which we know is an issue. And we look up R for replacement air. Oh, it's there. And here's what you're going to find. This is another issue. This is just the definition of replacement air. And it says 3.3.43. Chapter 3 in all the NFPA books is the definitions. So if you get a definition question, that's great, but more than likely, you're not going to get a question. You're not going to get a definition question like, what is replacement error? You're going to get a question like, how much replacement error do you need? Well, the definition's not going to help you out. So, okay, so it's there. So that's not going to help us. And there is no other references for replacement error. But what we're going to find if we look under air movement, okay, under air movement, the last thing under air movement is replacement air. All right. So that's where we would go to actually find, you know, how much replacement air, what we're going to need. What they talk about, I think, in this book is how much vacuum, what's the maximum amount of negative vacuum you're gonna want, where, you know, with regard to how much replacement air you're putting in. I think it's like 0.02 water gauge. But either way, my point is that you'll find replacement air in the index, but it won't be where you think it's supposed to be. So it is even more important as you're finding information in these practice exams to highlight the indexes in the 90s, in the NFPA books, the 96, 90A, and the 90B. So make sure that you do that. Make sure that you highlight as you go through. And then when you do get a question and you think it's in one of the NFPA books, you may need to scan the whole index. These indexes aren't very long. Okay, so you can scan the whole thing for your keyword. All right. And it's really apparent in the 90A and the 90B. These are just really poorly organized indexes. All right. So we have our 90A and our 90B. Now, our 90A and our 90B are very closely related, very similar types of information. One of the things that I've always struggled with is which one to go to. Okay. We know it's going to be an and you know, it's probably going to be a, you know, something that has to do with fire protection, like putting a heater in a duct or some type of fusible link rating or something along those lines. So, but which one do we go to? Is it the 90A or the 90B? Well, if we look at, let's try the 90B first of all. Okay. First of all, at the front, it's a slightly different definition. The 90A says standard for the installation of air conditioning and ventilating systems. Okay, that's good. 90B says standard for the installation of warm air heating systems and air conditioning systems. So that already tells us if we're talking about warm air, all right, it would tend to be in the 90B. Heater, right? Versus just air conditioning. Air conditioning is in both of them. Ventilating is in 90A. But heating he's going to tend to be in the 90B. The other thing about the 90B, all right, is, and I want you to go to, and I'm just going to call out page 4. It's 90B-4, page 4. It tells us application. This is paragraph 1.3.1. This standard shall apply to all systems for the movement of environmental air in structures that serve the following. Okay, so paragraph 1 or 2 family dwellings. Okay, so this is telling us these are houses, right? Houses, 1 or 2 family dwellings. And paragraph 2, spaces not exceeding 25,000 cubic feet in volume. Okay, so what's 25,000 cubic feet? Okay, so it's nice to know, but 25,000 cubic feet might be hard to conceptualize, you know? So it could be a commercial structure, but 25,000 cubic feet or less. So let's think about what 25,000 cubic feet is. Think about a typical house, okay, a typical residence being somewhere around 2,500 square feet. All right, so you got a typical house that's 2,500 square feet, decent sized house. Let's picture this house having 10-foot ceilings. Okay, so 2,500 times 10 is 25,000. So that gives us a reference point about what size what size buildings this applies to, what size structures this applies to. It applies to 1 and 2 family homes and your relatively smaller commercial. All right, which is good to know, because some of these questions will present themselves in such a way that you realize that they're not talking about a house. They got to be talking about commercial. All right. And I'll give you an example. And if you guys have been in this class a couple of times, you've heard this a couple of times, and I apologize for that. But I'll give you an example. If it's I had somebody explain this to me. This is not my business. This is not what I do for a living. And so I did not understand this concept. They were talking about an exhaust shaft, and they were talking about subducts going into this exhaust shaft, and that they would go, if the subduct goes into the exhaust shaft and goes up into the exhaust shaft 22 inches, you don't need a fire damper. All right. So you got a picture like a condominium, a high-rise condominium, and all these units have exhaust fans in their kitchens. All right. And they've got these ducts, these subducts that go out, and then they go into a common duct. Okay. And then, of course, out the building. Well, if you go into that common duct with your subduct and you go up into that duct 22 inches or more, you don't have to use a fire damper. Well, why is that important? Well, fire dampers can be expensive. You've got to put your fire damper in. It's got to be hooked to some type of power, and you got to have an access panel. All right. So it'd be advantageous, not to have a fire damper. Well, my whole point behind talking about this is, at this point, you realize, okay, we're not talking about a house here. We're talking about a multi-story situation. So that's going to be the 90A, not the 90B. Okay. So the 90A on page 4. Yeah. Page 4, paragraph 1.3, application. This standard shall apply to all systems for the movement of environment, air, and structures as are the following: spaces over 25,000 cubic feet. Okay, and then buildings of type 3, 4, and 5 construction over 3 stories in height. And you don't really need to know what type 3, 4, and 5 are. All those are just categories of fire resistance. Okay, not a big deal for you to understand that, but that's what they are. But over 3 stories in height, buildings and spaces not covered by applicable standards. So we're talking about commercial buildings. That's what we're talking about. 90A is commercial, 90B is residential and small commercial. Is basically what we're talking about. And then the 90B is warm air and not so much air conditioning. All right. And then once again, go to the index. Okay. And it's just going to be the same situation in this index, but even more so than the 96. The indexes in the 90A and the 90B are just pretty pitiful. And it's not that the keyword or the concept is not in the index. It's just not where it's just under some other heading. So when you're looking for something, scan the whole index. All right, scan the whole thing, and that might help you find it. And then and they're not very long, so it's not going to take you long to scan it. The other thing is, these books aren't very long, so you might just want to sit down, and read the whole thing. You can just read them all, and that'll get you a good idea of what's in them. They're readable. It's not like the refrigeration and air conditioning technology book that's 1,700 pages or something. We're not going to get through that one, right? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk. So we're talking a little bit about the NFPA. We finished that. So the next manuals that we discuss that are on the list are the SMACNAs, Sheet Metal Association Contractors. All right, the old SMACNA. And the first one is the fibrous glass duct. Now I don't have my, I do. It's right here. Fibrous glass duct, right there. Fibrous glass duct. Not a very very thick manual. for that reason, you won't get many questions out of it. Easier to find stuff in the fibrous glass duct. Why? Because of the 3 SMACNA manuals, it has the only index, and it's not a bad index, okay? You'll probably want more questions about fibrous glass duct, okay? It's pretty obvious, okay, that it is going to be about fibrous glass duct. I'll probably say fibrous in the question. Anything fibrous in the question, you're going to think the fibrous glass duct book, okay? What are the hangers? How do we hook up a riser? How do we put in a damper? How do we, what are the joinery methods and so forth? All of those types of things, cross tabs and so forth. You can find it all in the index and it'll get you right there. Okay. There's only probably one question that we need to really walk you through on this one. And that's how you figure out how many square feet of metal you need to use when you put a sleeve in for a heater. Okay. And that can get a little tricky, but hopefully we'll have time to go through that. Good index. You probably won't need the table of contents, but you can take a look at it as well. You'll get this one. This book happens to be one of those that's pretty easy to navigate. Okay, good index. The other SMACNA books are exactly the opposite. They are hard to navigate and they do not have indexes. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we usually just call this book Metal and Flexible. So as we refer to it in class, we'll just call it Metal and Flexible. It's the SMACNA HVAC Duct Construction Standards Metal and Flexible. Okay, so this is obviously not fibrous. This is obviously exactly what it says. Metal ducts, rectangular ducts, metal ducts, round metal ducts, flexible ducts, and so forth. So this is everything else. And the first thing that you're going to see if you look at the back of the book is there is no index. Dadgummit. Not a very good book not to have an index in. This is not an easy, probably one of the tougher books to navigate. Okay, so since it doesn't have an index, what we have to do is we have to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to navigate this book? First of all, you're going to have hopefully tabbed and highlighted, okay, which is definitely going to help. But as we look through so let's look through our next line of defense after our index. We're going to look at the table of contents. Okay, so we're in the front of the book. We're on page XIII. So this is Roman numeral 13. Okay. And the first chapter is about engineering and design. Okay. So that's going to be some general information about the metal itself and, what you're supposed to use, what type of metal, the G60 coating and so forth. Okay. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is all about your rectangular duct. Okay, that's pretty obvious. This is the stuff that's, when you build it, it's going to be a rectangular shape. It's going to be all about the different joinery methods. It's going to be all about the reinforcement methods. It's going to be about your tie rods. It's going to be about your hangers. It's going to be about all those different things that have to do with building a rectangular metal duct. Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Obviously, round, oval, and flexible. Okay, same type of thing. Now, these are, fairly obvious things. We're gonna get into this in a little more detail. Chapter 5, hangers and supports. Probably get a question out of that. And chapter 7, accessories. All right, chapter 7 is about accessories. What we find is you'll get questions about your flexible liners. So in chapter 7, that's section 7.4 on page 7.14. All right. So now that's one way to help us find information is looking in the index. There's another way to navigate this book that I want to make you aware of. Okay. So because of the nature of the information, you're going to find a lot of information on tables. Okay. They're going to tell you this is the size of the duct. This is the pressure class. What thickness metal. What gauge metal do you need to build this duct out of? Okay, well, that kind of information is going to come in a table. All right. So being able to find these tables is going to be important to you. All right. And they have a list of tables there on page 15. It's Roman numeral 15. XV, right after the table of contents. So you have a list of tables, all right, all the different things. You know, I've got a few highlighted. 3-2 is your angle ring size. 3-3 is the ring attachment schedule. And notice that every one of these tables, most of these tables, they have a table and then they have the same number and it has an M beside it. Okay, well, the M simply means it's the same table, but it's in metric. All right, and we will generally not use metric. So that'll help, that narrows it down just a little bit. Okay, so you have all these tables. And what I want to point out to you is there is a box, there's a rectangular box close to the top of the page that says, due to the large numbers of tables in chapter 2, the list of tables has been placed immediately after the chapter 2 title page. We're going to go there in just a minute and take a look at that. Okay. But before we do, we're going to flip the page to figures. This is the same thing with figures. Because of the nature of the information, there's going to be a lot of figures. They're going to have all these drawings that show you, you know, what they're talking about, which is nice. All right. But as you can see, there's a lot of figures, and it might help you just to understand that and to go through these figures. Highlight them when you use them. When you go through your practice exams, highlight them because you might see them again on the actual exam. And it also says in that box, that rectangular box at the top of page XVI, Roman numeral 16, that due to the large number of figures in chapter 2, the list of figures has been placed immediately after the chapter 2 title page. So since we saw that twice now, let's flip over to chapter 2 and look at the chapter 2 title page. And we go just behind the chapter 2 title page, and we'll see all these different tables. Okay, all your first several tables are all your deck reinforcement. Okay, and then it has, and then all the rest of these tables are basically, it tells you what you're going to be able to be making the ductwork out of, and what your reinforcement has to be, and so on and so forth. And as we go through, what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit of time in this book, either tonight or in the next class, and we'll get an idea of what these tables are all about. Kind of, they're complicated if you are not familiar with them, but once you get familiar with them, they start to make a little bit of sense. And then you have the same thing on the next page, which is your list of figures. All right, and same type of thing. There's a whole bunch of figures here, and we, diagrams, and we may be able to access those. Okay, just real quick, I do want you to make sure that you can find probably the most questions out of this book will come between pages 2.6 and 2.10. And you'll see there's a bunch of diagrams of your different joinery methods in your reinforcement. Okay, and then they have a few bullets about each one. Okay, so that's, they call those different, the way you join these metal rectangular ducts and all the seams and what have you. Okay, and what they're good for. And we'll talk, like I said, hopefully we'll have time to kind of dig through this book and really look at some details in that book. Okay, so that's our HVAC duct construction standards, metal and flexible. Anybody have any questions so far about the books we've looked at? Okay, the manuals. The other HVAC book is, this has traditionally been my most unfavorite book of all of them. It's, once again, it's a SMACNA book, Sheet Metal Association. All right. And it's called Energy Systems Analysis and Management Manual. All right. So originally we talked about this being an engineering book. All right. We kind of talked about this book along with the train books. We had Train Reciprocating Refrigeration and Train Air Conditioning Manual. Well, they don't have that anymore. And we talked about those being what they call engineering books. Okay. Books about, you know, systems, about, you know, the different, you know, aspects of the air conditioning cycle, the air conditioning components, evaporators and compressors and refrigerants and cooling towers, and, you know, just, you know, heat gain, psychrometric charts, these engineering type questions that if you were going to build a big commercial system, you know, what would you need to know? You know, what are the big concepts? What are the properties of air? You know, what is, what is wet bulb and dry bulb, and how you plot them on a psychrometric chart, all these types of things. But as we really get into this book more, we find that it is also a lot about energy efficiency, hence the name, energy systems analysis and management. You know, how are you, there's a lot of interesting, sort of off the wall, energy recovery type issues in this book. They talk a lot about how energy is transferred, how, you know, different types of ways that you can recover energy and use it again in a building, hence managing the energy system. Okay. And then just a few things that do have to do with engineering. And what we do like to do at some point is take you through this book. Everything that we see in this book, at some point, either tonight or next Tuesday, we'll go through the entire book and tell you exactly what we think is important in this book. The reason is because there's no index. Okay. And so there's no way for you to know really unless we take you through the book as what's important. So we'll be doing that. So no index, table of contents. It's kind of overwhelming, to be honest with you, you know. And so I don't really spend a lot of time even looking at the table of contents. We're just going to show you basically page by page what you need to know out of the Energy Systems Analysis and Management Manual. Okay. The train, now my book says, I've got an old list here and it talks about the train manuals. Those are not used anymore. Hopefully everybody is aware of the fact that the train air conditioning manual and the train reciprocating refrigeration manual have been replaced by the refrigeration and air technology manual. All right. And as Joaquin told us, there is a lot of stuff that's in this book. Okay. Well, you know, it's actually, if you don't hurt yourself picking it up, it is actually to your benefit that it's all in this book. Okay. All the engineering stuff, except for what you might find in the book we just talked about, the SMAC, the Energy Systems Analysis and Management Manual. All of your engineering questions are going to come out of this book. Okay. Like I said before, this is all about the properties of air. It's all about different motors. It's all about the, you know, components of the air conditioning cycle. It's, you know, psychrometric charts are in here. This is very broad-based, big picture, and what we like to call engineering questions. Okay, so if we do any practice exams together, or if you do them on your own, some questions are just going to jump out at you as, okay, that's an engineering question. That's about an air conditioning or refrigeration component. Maybe it's about refrigerant or so, or, you know, or something like that. You know, we can say, okay, well, it's not a safety question. It's not a pipe question. It's not a rope question. It's not about troubleshooting. Okay. It's not about duct work. So it's not about energy efficiency. That would be another book. So there's a good chance it's an engineering question. Okay. It's about some type of system component. And well, the first thing we ask ourselves when we look at a book is, what's the index all about? It is an incredibly detailed index. All right. As Joaquin told us, he was able to find pretty much everything in this book. They really did us a good favor by swapping the two train manuals. Because the problem with the train manuals was you never knew which one it was going to be in. It could be in the train air conditioning. It could be in the reciprocating refrigeration. Well, we know it's an engineering question. It's likely to be in this book. And it's got like 30 pages of index. All right. It also has a glossary. You could call it a good thing, or you could call it a confusing thing. Either way, maybe it'd help you out if English is not your first language, maybe or maybe not. But the index, excuse me, the glossary is in English and Spanish. All right, and so it looks like the black print is in English and the blueprint is in Spanish. So that might help it. That might help you out. But it's got a great glossary as well. Sometimes just your glossary will get you where you need to be. Maybe you're looking for a definition. All right. But interesting, huge addition to our arsenal there. Okay. So as we go through, we'll talk about, we do have to know a little bit about the ductilator. Probably one of the first things that we're going to do tonight, once we get through looking at the manuals, is work on our ductilator a little bit. So make sure you have your ductilator. And, yep. And don't really have to discuss that right now. And the other two books, there's two manuals that I like to talk about at the same time. Okay, we're getting close to the end. We have just a few more to talk about, but these two I like to talk about at the same time. It's your code book, which is your Florida Building Code Energy Conservation, one of the code books that you have. And then there's the Energy Efficient Building Construction in Florida. Okay, they're both about energy conservation, energy efficiency, and so forth. And that's the reason why I like to talk about them at the same time. Okay. How do you know which one to go to? Well, here's what I've been able to surmise is that energy efficient building construction in Florida is a lot of great general knowledge. It's about insulation and the different types of insulation and the R value of the different types of insulation per inch. It's about window treating and how you can make windows more energy efficient. It's about SEER value and what SEER is and so forth. And then they've got this, heating efficient, heaters and their efficiency. And so if you get, it's going to be pretty obvious in the question that it's about energy conservation. Okay. Remember, you have an energy systems analysis and management manual, could come in there too, but there's probably a better chance it'll come out of the Energy Efficient Building Construction in Florida or the Florida Building Code Energy Conservation. What we're trying to do now is differentiate between the two. General good information is in the Energy Efficient Building Construction in Florida. The Florida Building Code Energy Conservation is a book of rules, okay? Minimums and maximums. It's got to be a certain way, all right? The maximum air infiltration for a window is, 0.3 cubic feet per minute. All right. Talks about skylights and maximum, the most you can have in skylights. It talks about, your different building components and the U factors that they have to be by code and so on and so forth. So if it's an energy conservation question and it's one of those what we call shall be questions, it's got to be a certain way, then there's a good chance that it's Florida Building Code Energy Conservation. By the way, we didn't talk about the index. The index in both of these books is excellent. Now, but with regard to that, there's something about the Florida Building Code Energy Conservation that you need to know. And one of those things is there's two parts to it. There's a commercial and a residential. All right. The commercial portion of the energy code book is in the front. Florida Building Code Energy Conservation is in the front. And each one of your paragraphs is going to have a C in front of it for commercial. And then there is an index for it. There's an appendix, there's an appendices, and there's an index. And the index is going to be right in the middle of the floor of the book. Okay, right in the middle of the binder. There's an index, and that's just for the commercial section. And then what you'll find is you'll find the back half of the book is residential. All right, and then there's a separate index for the residential section. So be aware that could be an issue in finding an answer in the book. Generally, the commercial tends to be more complicated and more complex, and your tables are a little harder to read. Your residential tends to be, fairly simple stuff. But it's good to know how it is organized. Commercial in the front with its own index, residential in the back with its own index. Okay, so there we go. So we have our energy conservation books, and then the last and not least is the Florida Building Code Mechanical. That's the purple one. It does have an index, a good index as well. Okay, and you can just kind of can kind of look at the table of contents and get an idea of what's in it. Okay, there's some general regulations in Chapter 3. What you'll see, one of the subjects in Chapter 3 that's important is what they call a section called protection of the structure, section 302. So when you're installing piping and ductwork and all types of different things in buildings, you have to protect the structure. You just can't chop out a whole floor joist to get your ductwork in, right? Get your piping in. You've got certain guidelines about how much you can take out of a stud or a joist, when you're installing your mechanicals. All right, and so that's going to be in Chapter 3, and of course Chapter 4 is ventilation, pretty obvious. Exhaust systems, duct systems, Chapter 6. Chimneys and vents, Chapter 8, and so forth. Chapter 11, refrigeration. Okay, there's code issues with regard to refrigeration piping. Okay, and then fuel oil. And then there's some stuff about solar as well. Page Chapter 14. There's a few pages, a couple of pages about solar. So once again, code questions are going to present themselves. Many times they'll have the word shall in it. It shall be a certain way. Okay, it's a law. It's going to read like a rule or a law. Okay, something that's got to be a certain way. And that basically takes us through all the manuals, gives us an overview of what to expect. And I'm going to circulate